This podcast is supported by Secretly Society, a record club offering the best new albums in exclusive, limited edition vinyl colours, delivered to your door each month, with perks like free shipping, members-only discounts, and first dibs on rare finds. Secretly Society is a record club for new collectors and crate diggers alike. Sign up and become a member wherever you are in the world. Just head on over to secretlystore.com. Yes, it's Secretly Frequencies, the podcast that meets record labels and artists from the Secretly Group family and hears the untold stories behind their musical histories. I hope you're enjoying the episodes so far as much as we're enjoying making them. It's been a real pleasure hearing some of the stories behind the songs. We're continuing our label series today, and for this episode I'm joined by Jennifer Newcomer, Senior Creative Licensing Director for Numero Group, and we're going to chat to Numero Group's head honchos Ken and Rob about their 20-year run of incredible releases. I can't quite believe it's already been 20 years. Hi Jen, how's it going?
Hi, yes. So I've been working with Ken and Rob since 2006. It has been a long and incredible journey getting to know them and getting to work with the catalog, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So this is actually going to be one of two Numero Group episodes, one of their flagship soul, disco, and gospel catalogs, and the second on their newer 80s and 90s punk, hardcore, and artistic rock discoveries.
And you can't get two more opposite sides of the spectrum than that. Numero Group have been going since 2003 and have uncovered so many hidden worlds that we thought the only way we could even scratch the surface was to cleave their Secretly Frequency episode in two. As they put it, there's no basement too dank, no box too dusty for their intrepid team of researchers, writers, producers, and engineers.
So this is the first episode, looking at a lot of artists whose songs have found a new lease on life in the streaming world, and it's really helped to kickstart a global soul revival.
Let's see where Rob and Ken are at. How are you doing, guys?
Hey, Tom.
Howdy, Tom.
Where are you right now, Rob?
I'm in Chicago, Illinois, the Little Village neighborhood.
Awesome. And Ken, how about you?
I'm in Los Angeles in Highland Park.
Fantastic. Okay, so I hope you guys are ready. I think we should kick off with our first song now.
So this is Johnson, Hawkins, Tatum, and Durr. You Can't Blame Me.
Exactly. So this is from the first compilation that you put out, Numero 001, the capsule label. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the beginnings of the label, where you were at, how you founded it?
Well, I'd say that song had a big impact on us starting the label. It was one of the first records that Rob brought over to my apartment, and he brought this stack of soul singles and had an idea for a project called Eccentric Soul, and that Johnson, Hawkins, Tatum Durr single on Capsule was one of the first or second records that he played.
I had learned about it from Dante Carfagna, who is Columbus, Ohio native, and had a special connection to the record. It had a really powerful impact on me, and he even gave me a clue as to how I could get a copy, which at the time was, there's not as many online outlets. He actually said, call Used Kids. They recently acquired Jeff Smith's collection, and Jeff Smith was one of the songwriters. When we went to visit Bill Moss, we also stopped by the Used Kids record store and bought a few copies of that, bought a few other things on Capsule. And that was really the start of us looking at a label. And Dante was instrumental in creating that project and would be instrumental in creating a number of the soul projects that we would do over the 20 years that we've been doing this.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you guys were doing right before this? Like what your previous job was that kind of led you to this point?
Well, I had been working in catalog for a company called Rykodisc, which is sort of like the premier CD reissue label of the 80s and 90s, and had just been let go of my job. And I knew that I wanted to get into doing another label after my first one had fallen apart, and that it was going to be a catalog focused label. And I had one record that I'd sort of taken with me as I walked out the door at Ryko, which was by this group called Antenna, and the album was called Camino del Sol. And Rob came along and brought a plethora of incredible ideas.
While he was doing that, I was working at a record distributor called Groove, and I was putting out a bunch of different records. And the first time we actually spoke on the phone, I had seen his early run of Numero singles. And when I found out that I had a connection to him through a mutual friend, I got in touch to find out where he had printed those sleeves, because I really like the sleeves. And we did a run for Wobbly Head of 7 inches that actually, if you look at them, look very similar to the Numero sleeve that Ken created.
And what was the first meeting like with Bill Moss when you guys went to Columbus, Ohio?
We had what at the time felt like a pretty sophisticated pitch, which was like on a PowerPoint. I think we like projected it on a wall and showed him like, this is what we're thinking about doing. And it was on some kind of like circa turn of the century white MacBook. And it seemed very probably sophisticated to us at the time, and to Bill, who this guy's coming from a completely different place. And so we had, I think, a slight technological edge that he really liked, and that we came in and we were super organized. We had the idea, like we knew exactly what we wanted to do with the label. We knew that it was going to be sync focused, and we put several examples, including like the Nick Drake Volkswagen commercial or the Creation and the Target ad. And we knew that we wanted to do like really deluxe packaging, and we knew that at the time it was going to be a direct-to-consumer only label. Like we weren't going to have distribution. So we had some of the central tenets of the label already set up, and he'd heard from other reissue people over the years. There'd been tons of British people who'd come over and tried to do various things with them, and he'd licensed a couple of songs, some compilations. But I think that our youthful energy, Rob's 25, I was 26 when we started the label, I think that he really appreciated it. And we connected on the level of having failed record labels, because I'd had a failed record label. And while I don't think that Rob would classify Wobbly Head as a failed record label, nor would I do think that it wasn't exactly like the most successful record label, and that there was a kinship that he felt between us as sort of survivors of the record game.
When we'd have a conversation with them, you'd always walk away feeling like you were on the right track. Now, that may not be true, but that's how we made you feel.
Should we hear another song?
Penny in the Quarters, You and Me.
There we go. Yes, You and Me, Penny in the Quarters, a hugely notable track in the catalogue. Tell us about how you came across this. How did it end up in Blue Valentine?
This is another project that Dante Carfagna was really key to, as again, Columbus native and also just probably the greatest scholar of soul music who's ever lived. He found out about a brace of master tapes that had come out of an estate sale for one of the owners of the pre-label. And we were a couple years in at this point, and we'd managed to have some success. You wouldn't believe how many labels start up and just disappear right away. So we'd at least like proven our mettle. And so this was really the first project that he brought to us and really wanted us to do. We were working with a studio engineer named Michael Slaybach. He helped us get these things transferred as a side hustle at a studio that he was working at. and we started assembling from a fairly large number of tracks, a pretty interesting compilation. And we struggled with it a lot because this was the first time that we'd encountered a wealth of unreleased material. I have vivid memories of Ken and I struggling with some of the commercially released tracks on there, which were in some cases not that great. Our biggest success at that point was some syncs we'd done with Marion Black, Who Knows? And here we had these new to us tracks from Marion Black. We struggled with whether or not we wanted to put those on the compilation because we kind of felt that they weren't that strong. It ended up being this really vital mix of intended for commercial release tracks and demos that are incredibly special. And one of probably the most special demo on here is the, what was at the time the incredibly mysterious Penny and the Quarters.
The interesting thing about the Penny and the Quarters track is that there was some debate over whether or not that we would include it on the record. When Pre came out, that record did not sell very well. In fact, I would say that at the time, it was one of our worst selling records. It really struggled to connect with audiences. The commercial stuff was good, not great necessarily. And the demo stuff was so buried at the end of the record that it was hard for people to listen to it as a complete capsule. But if you start out on side C of that record and you just go from there, you actually have a really interesting listen. And it's a capsule of a studio and a time where they were probably at their creative apex and writing really incredible songs and not necessarily capturing the finished product, but just like the bones of what makes a great song. And Penny and the Quarters is one of those songs. The way the song kind of surfaced was we had a publicist at the time, Catherine Frazier, and she was representing Ryan Gosling's group, Dead Man's Bones. Gosling was over at her house one night and saw a bunch of Numero records and thought that they looked cool all together, the way that the spines fell. And then he called up our office and was like, I want to buy one of everything. And so we charged his credit card and put a box in the mail to some address in Los Angeles and kind of just kept moving on, right? About a year later, Jen gets a call from this music supervisor, Joe Rudge, who's working on a film by this director, Derek Cianfrance, called Blue Valentine, and they had like no music budget whatsoever. They had Grizzly Bear doing the soundtrack, and so all the money had been eaten up, but they had a few special cues, and Ryan had suggested this song, You and Me, as sort of like their song between him and Michelle Williams in the film, and like really wanted it. And he wanted it to be a surprise when he played it for her so that almost everybody was hearing the song for the first time. They kind of pre-cleared it through for, I don't know, $1,500 or something like that.
Yeah, it was very low.
And we said yes. And at the time it was like, you got to understand, Pre was a record that we had thousands of copies of unsold copies. Nobody was buying this record. And to even get $1,500 out of it was going to be a win. So we synced the song and it went in this low budget film. And even at the time we were like, it's just some low budget film. Nobody's going to care about it. And then the film ended up being kind of having an audience. And one of the more special cinematic moments of the movie happened to be about this Penny and the Quarters song.
I mean, there's definitely one more component to this, which is more so how you figured out who the actual vocalist on this song is, which I think is like such a fascinating story. Do you want to tell us about that?
Fans of the movie, which, I have to admit I've never seen still to this day, got very obsessed with the song. And this is in a little bit of a pre-viral, pre-Reddit era. So it actually kind of coalesced around an article in, I believe it was The Guardian. And so this article gets published. And then essentially the local press in Columbus, Ohio picks up on this story because anything that's of interest outside Columbus, of anything inside Columbus, is going to get local press in Columbus.
Then like another year went by and there was a couple other articles of somebody saying like, who is this mysterious group? And every day is a slow news day in Columbus. And so like any opportunity they had, they would sort of write about this thing. And it got, I don't know, 4 or 5 different articles written about this song over the course of like a year. And then time just went by. And one night in some town in Italy, a college student and a DJ are having a conversation, And the DJ's like, oh, where are you from? And she says, I'm from Columbus. And he's like, oh, I just heard an interesting story about this unknown singer from Columbus named Penny and a group called the Quarters. And proceeds to tell her this entire story. And then she's like, that's interesting. My mom's name is Penny. And she used to sing in a group back with her brothers in the late 60s. I wonder if it's the same thing. And lo and behold, it was.
One of my favorite things about the story is Penny's daughter actually waited a couple months to even ask her mom. She didn't think it rose to the level of importance to make an international call.
So shall we go to the next song? You guys ready?
Nobody knows.
That is it. Nobody knows. Pastor TL Barrett. Do you guys want to tell us a little bit about how you met Pastor TL Barrett?
How we met Pastor TL Barrett? Well, we called him and asked him if we could come meet him. I guess that, I mean, Pastor TL Barrett is and has been a local legend for quite a while. When we first got in touch, we were making the follow-up to our first gospel funk compilation, which was called Good God, a gospel funk hymnal. Did really well for us, and so it was natural that we decided to follow up with another collection. I'd been gathering material that I wanted to use for it, and after the success of the first one, we all felt the linchpin of that compilation was going to be the song Like a Ship by TL Barrett. And this was still the landline era, and we just called his office and set up an appointment, went to his basement and met with him. And at the time, it was pretty interesting because he had very much distanced himself from any of this kind of material. He said that he didn't even have a copy, not even a personal copy, and really didn't have much even in the way of documentation. Ken, if you recall, the photos that we used for the compilation were ones that he just had on his wall that we saw the first time we visited.
It was like Isaac Hayes and Jesse Jackson, TL Barrett in a photo, and that was the documentation that we had. And I think in those liner notes, it was very, very brief. We didn't get into really any of his real story. I think mostly because he was pretty guarded about it. We were just enamored with this really incredible gospel song and not really thinking about how to tell a bigger story about Chicago gospel music and what fell through the cracks. And we sub-licensed the record to another label, and they pressed a couple thousand copies and didn't do a very good job with it. And then, all of a sudden it was just picking up steam. I think we got like a Nike commercial, and then there was commercial after commercial, Under Armour at one point, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden it was like, man, this is probably one of the biggest gospel records, I don't know, like other than Aretha Franklin. I mean, it's, like, when do you hear gospel music being used in a modern capacity in the same way? I don't think that he's by any stretch of the imagination a household name, but his music has resonated in a way and it's transcended his own life.
And you would definitely say, a huge component to Pastor TL Barrett's success is also the whole sampling phenomenon that's kind of happened with his catalog. Did you guys sort of anticipate that would happen?
Most of the energy around sampling was with the song Father Stretch My Hands, which was a Kanye track. There is something that feels very sample friendly about this material, though. I mean, you can never truly anticipate a sample. It's just part of a different creative process. But there is something very magical about this material that opens itself to sampling. So I do think we always consider that a key part of our interest in this. It feels like it is ready to be a hip hop record.
Absolutely.
Let's hear the next song, I think.
This is Judy and the Affections?
Best things
The
in life.
Dreamliners, best things in life.
Okay, we caught you out.
Damn.
They know the answer. Let them try again.
It's funny though, because like that's not even the Dreamliner song that I would have picked. Do you want to talk about girl groups?
Yeah, definitely. Let's get into girl groups.
Well, it's funny because Jen, you were actually a really big component in me getting into girl groups because we had a couple of things and we were trying to get syncs on them. And you're like, I keep getting requests for more of this like 60s girl group sound. What Numero stuff do we have? And it was pretty abysmal. We just didn't have very much. And not that what we had wasn't good. I think at the time we had like 4J's, Will You Be My Love, and a handful of other really minor kind of girl group things, but I'd never really considered that Numero could make a girl group comp, mostly because my experience with it was on that incredible Rhino box set, One Kiss Can Lead to Another, which is like shaped in a hat box and it had 4 CDs and it was just like, it felt like the true girl group underground. But leave it to Numero to always recognize that there's an underground under the underground. And we just started, really looking at one-off groups that had made really delicate and cool singles in the 60s that could all fit together. And it started out as a sync play, really looking for things that could replace other bigger girl group sounds. And then we ended up stumbling onto things like the Dreamliners. Funny enough, Dreamliners was already in our catalog at the time because we'd done a deal with this guy, Abe Epstein, who had a bunch of labels down in San Antonio. But we didn't even rate those songs when we were doing our Epstein compilation. It hadn't even occurred to us that that was going to be a sound that people were going to care about. And so as we started looking towards the edges of our catalog and pulling these things in is how the focus of Basement Beehive came together. Our original idea was that it was going to be called like Sweet 16 or something like that. And then Rob, we were circling around the idea of like beehive, like the hairdo, and just that idea of like, oh, what's a word that, kind of fits with beehive. And I think Rob just blurted out on the way to the grocery store one day, Basement Beehive. And that was it. It was just like, that's going to be the name of the thing. And then, we made a playlist called Basement Beehive First. This was one of the first records that we ever did that started out as a playlist. We were like, let's just start taking all the cool girl group stuff we have, put it in a playlist, and then put it around all the other interesting girl group tracks that are out there that are, again, like a more of an underground sound, less of a polished Motown thing and more of a basement thing.
I think I had wanted to call it the Girl Group Underground, and that was a little too on the nose. We always try and make our titles not exactly right on the nose, which was a tradition we continued until we called that compilation Private Yacht. But I still think Private Yacht's a great name, so I'm not mad about it.
Is there quite a lot? I mean, I'm really interested to know more about the titling of the Numero comps. Is this a process that can last for weeks, for months? Is there a lot of arguing about it?
There's a lot of, like local customs was hard fought. You want it to be clever. You want it to express the concept without being just like heavy funk. Like we've always felt like we're better than that. And I think that's bared out thus far.
Is there a name that you've used that you regret? And is there a name that you didn't use that you now regret?
Teen Expo is one that I still don't love. I don't think that we kind of nailed the sort of we were looking for something that could capture like a teener, late 50s, early 60s sock hop energy. And, we put it out there. And the record that's attached to it, which is by this really brilliant label called Cleopatra out of New Jersey, I think in a way it suffered a little bit from the title, but the whole record is completely misunderstood.
Right. And what about any names that you're now thinking, oh, we've come up with such a great idea for something now, or if only we could have used that? Or will you just go ahead and use it? Is there a case of name first, putting together comp later?
Well, there's a concept first. After Ken and I spent some time down at his parents' place in Mississippi, we decided we wanted to use some of his stepdad's artwork in a compilation, and we didn't know what the music was going to be yet. We knew we had an artwork concept. It was built around his D&D game, which he had created copious illustrations for.
Awesome. Okay. I think we're going to move on to our next song now.
Glamour Girl, Harvey.
Glamour Girl. Glamour Girl.
Glamour Girl, Harvey Scales and the Seven Sounds. And you know that I picked this song because I am dying to talk about Cuca and Jim Kirchstein and how that all came to be, and literally what you guys thought when you unveiled the massive amount of catalog that he was sitting on.
Well, we were working on this compilation called Homeschooled, the ABCs of Kid Soul, and it's all kid soul groups that were sort of in the vein of the Jackson 5. There was a really interesting kid soul record that Cuca made by a group called Step by Step. The record's called Time After Time, and we knew we wanted it. And in 2006 or 7, I got on the phone with Jim and had my first conversation with him and told him about what we were doing. And I think we licensed it for like $100 or something like that. And he was like, sure, yeah, whatever. Over the years, we just kept talking to him, kept learning more. And if you live in the Midwest, as Rob and I did at the time, you invariably end up seeing Cuca records because it was probably the largest. I mean, it has to be the number one manufacturer of Wisconsin music for the period of like 1960 to 1972. They made well over like 1,000 records. And so you'd see Cuca records, but whether it was like a polka thing or a gospel thing or some kind of weird beehive singer, or I don't know, like he recorded everything. He was the spot to record music at in Wisconsin in the 1960s. And I don't know when we first went to visit him. That might have been like 2015 or 2016, but going into his basement and just realizing that he had thousands of hours of music that had not been released or had only been released on 45. And then it was a process from there of like trying to convince Jim that Numero was going to be a great steward for both the Cuca brand and also the music that he'd made over the course of his life. I mean, this is, in a lot of ways, this is his life's work. He had other interests and he had other lives after the recording studio and the recording label, but he was just at his best when he was doing Cuca. And I think he was really apprehensive about letting it go. I mean, I don't think we did that deal until he was in his late 80s, 87, 88 or something like that. And at the time he was still like fulfilling mail order down in his basement, printing out little labels and burning CDs in his basement to send out to polka fanatics around the world. And so it took a lot to get him to want to stop running Cuca.
This is a guy that had worked a full-time job while working another full-time job as a recording engineer. He worked he worked for the state or the county or the federal government or something. It was like a governmental type job that he did 40 hours a week. Came home and ran a recording studio, and as if that wasn't enough, his hobby was marionettes. He's got hundreds of custom marionettes that he's created of celebrities, and some of these are like very like time-sensitive celebrities, like, flash in the pan type things. Like, I think there's one of like Joey Buttafuoco, if I recall correctly, and Prince and John F. Kennedy and Johnny Carson. I'm just going off the top of my head. I have ones I remember.
Michelle Obama.
Oh yeah, Michelle Obama. Yeah, they're pretty amazing.
But the Cuca thing, it was a 10-year project to get Jim to yes. And we didn't know it was going to take 10 years. We didn't spend, all 10 years poking at Jim every day, so much as you really had to build up the trust with a person like him who felt like he was still in the music business and wasn't ready to let go of this thing. And we had to show him through years of paying royalties and doing things right and being a stand-up record label that we were going to be a good enough place to house his legacy. And I think it was really hard when we packed up those tapes I think that was in November of 2017. We drove a moving truck up and we put on, and he was like, okay, well, after this, we're going to get these to the Historical Society in Wisconsin. And we were like, sure. Because we had such a different idea for it, which was to really reanimate his record label and bring all the incredible things to light, because so much of it, we're still finding things, this week, like the Zacons, sort of a surf record that he recorded in 1962. And Rob noticed that there was a 45 for sale in an auction. And he was like, oh, do we even have this up yet? Nope. And then all of a sudden, he's like, got another Cuca record on the schedule.
Every time I feel like I uncover another song, I'm like, it's going to take us 10 more years to realize, all the gold that we have within this. It's just incredible.
Dwayne and the Drifters was another one recently. I was like, oh, why didn't we think about using this for the You're Not From Around Here sequel? Like we ran out of time. It's like we literally had this for years and we hadn't been thinking about it. So yeah, it's just filled with endless surprises.
Shall we listen to the next track?
My heart can't beat, baby, unless you tell it to. My eyes can't see, baby, unless you tell them to. There are things I should do, but I know it's just no use, 'cause
I'm Controlled by Your Love, Helene Smith.
That's it.
Just to go back to when we first encountered this, I got a mixtape from a friend, Tony Janda, RIP, who was just kind of like a local DJ, 45 collector, and part of the group of people who were sort of circulating around the local Soul 45 soul DJ scene, I guess, that I would say Dante was at the center of. I'm pretty sure it was Them Too was the first song that we'd ever heard, but it was enough. I said to Ken, I was like, we got to look into this Deep City label. And you just got on the phone with Willie Clark pretty much right away.
That was sort of my MO, was to get on the phone with somebody and have almost no idea what I was talking about, but just have enough enthusiasm to sort of get it across. The first time I called Bill Moss was this almost exact conversation that I had with Willie Clark 2 years later when we were calling Willie Clark from Deep City, which was, it's like, hey, we run this label, we're doing this type of thing. Here's how we're doing it. This is what we're interested in. You've got a really interesting catalog here. And again, I think I'd heard probably just Them Too, or maybe one song that Dante had played at Sheer Magic one night or something. And so I didn't really know a lot about it, but my trust in Rob was so high that if he was like, we should look into this, then it's like, okay, well, let me get on the phone. Let me see what I can do. And I called Willie Clark and he was like, well, you should come down to Miami and we'll meet. I put a little trip together. He picked me up from the airport and hung out with him in his car in his house for a couple of days. And he sort of drove me around the neighborhood and pointed out sites that used to be there. And I didn't really know anything. I was just kind of taking notes, but we sort of became like friends.
Yeah. So Deep City was the first black record label in Miami. What's your approach to sort of celebrating and telling these stories of erased musical histories that you come across?
Well, that's a complicated question. I think that we try to meet them where they're at and tell the story that they want to tell. Mm-hmm. It is a process of amplifying their perspective and honoring that more than anything. It's not trying to insert our narrative into the conversation, which is, when you look at the vast 95% of our liner notes don't mention who's writing the liner notes or who's putting out the record. It's all about the original creators.
Let's move on to our next song then.
talking about my thing, girl, and your thing. Yeah. This thing got hanging in front of me.
Wilfred Luckie, My Thing.
I'm gonna prove to you, you're gonna feel happy.
That is it. I know I asked Ken to make a lot of playlists for a lot of different people, and this is one of those songs that I find you putting on there. So I wanted to know a little bit more about the personal love for this one.
Well, it's not even my love for the song. I mean, although I do love it. I mean, it's a Rob discovery. I can't take credit for it. But when you know something is great, you want to put it out and you want to push it out as far as it can go. And that one certainly resonated, I think, the first time I heard it. But Rob, you can tell everybody about this incredible song.
So I got into this song in part. We were poking at a really cool studio in Trinidad called Semp. We were working with John Kirby on putting together this compilation, and we'd licensed a handful of songs. I came across this just really exploring fascinating music from the Caribbean, and I think I got the record right before I went to Japan, and I played it a lot in Japan and got a great response. And so when I came back, I said, well, Wilfred Luckie is a pretty uncommon name. I'm just going to look him up. And there was not much about him, but what I could tell, it looked like he lived in the United States. And so I just looked him up in the phone book and I tracked him down in New Orleans. And he had never really talked to anyone about his music, had really left everything behind when he came to the US and hadn't been performing. We've been bugging him for years to get a photograph, and he gave us a photo that is amusingly terrible. It's just a candid photo of him sitting on a beach. While it's charming in many respects, it's not really useful in selling this music or promoting this music. So this is just one of those songs that it doesn't matter if you know what you're going to do with it. You got to start doing something with it.
This is so ridiculous. I just looked this thing up on Discogs, and it's on 4 compilations that we've released for other people. It's on Indications Inspirations Volume 1. It's on Foxfire Sound, which is like a hotel somewhere, Volume 1. It's on The New Originals, which is like a clothing store in Amsterdam, a compilation. And then it's also on the Dogfish Head thing.
Yeah, our friends at we put together a compilation with our friends at Dogfish Head.
The funny thing to me that made me chuckle the most is that Foxfire is Noom 3002. New Originals is Noom 3004. 2 Beer Minimum, the Dogfish Head, is Noom 3007. So this song appears on 3 separate catalog numbers that were within 5 of one another.
Yeah, because everyone we play it for loves it.
On to the next song. Are you guys ready?
That's Syl Johnson, Goody Goody Good Times. What a weird choice.
Well, I wanted an underplayed Syl Johnson song, really just to start talking about Syl himself. And I know there's no shortage of good Syl stories. So I'll leave it with you guys.
Yeah, where to begin? My relationship with Syl's music goes back to, I know the first time I heard Syl Johnson was high school, and I know it was I heard a live performance of him playing it. I believe it was Taste of Chicago, but it might have been Blues Fest. Growing up here, you're gonna run into Syl Johnson at some point. Syl's a legend, and when we were getting started, I mean, he was so much of a legend that we were really intimidated by him. I'd been tracking down all the Twilight artists, and one day Syl just gave me a call. I had, I think, kind of put the word out to a few people that we'd talked to that we were cautiously interested in talking to Syl just to get his perspective. And so he called me, and during the course of that multi-hour call, he sang me almost his entire catalog. I'd be like, I love Try Me. And he'd be like, he'd sing it. And then I'd be like, later something else would come up, and then he'd sing it, and then he'd start bringing up his own songs, and then he'd sing them. So it was wild. I mean, it was almost hallucinatory. It was probably the first time I talked to someone that I really felt like was a giant of soul music.
He felt like just such a big star that it was almost outside of the Numero lane when we were working on it, where it was just like, man, can we work with somebody that's this big? Our mission prior to that had been to do really obscure music. And so we really had to prove ourselves to him a bit. And we did that over a number of years. And the first thing that we did was that we paid him as a producer on some of his Twilight recordings. The more and more that we gave him money or gave him adoration or something like that, he just got more comfortable with us. And he would just start showing up at our office and hanging out for a couple hours at a time. And he started coming around to the idea, he was like, oh, we should do all the Syl Johnson recordings from this period. How can we do that? We brought the idea to him, and then, he kind of immediately loved the idea of somebody making a box set about him. Then we were sort of off to the races. I mean, I still have photos of when he came over and signed the deal. I have video of the time when he unraveled the box set for the first time and showed the world. And, it's like he was as fascinated with Numero in the end as we were with him in the beginning. And we became tremendous friends. One of probably the most important relationships in the history of Numero, and somebody that I definitely don't want to hear from him every day. But now that he's gone, I certainly miss seeing his phone number light my screen up.
Do you think that because Syl was a better known artist, did you find that you were bringing more people in because of that first Syl comp?
Definitely. As we started out, we found that a lot of the music we wanted to surface is situations where you've got one or two tracks by an artist. It's just the nature of the game. And so while we did a few single artist collections early on, Antenna, Fern Jones, we really kind of became a compilation label because we were discovering so much great music that there's no way to not do it as part of a compilation. Sil Johnson, I think, showed us that the path to something really big is going to be through understanding a single artist, because it's just how it ends up working. You have to bring people in to the fold, and they're going to want to hear a lot more from that artist. And it's not just going to be, them two can only lead you so far. But once you've got 80 songs from an artist like Syl Johnson, it's going to be much bigger than what you can do with one song.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a couple more songs, so let's hear the next one now.
Just when you think it's all over, it comes back again. Love is funny, love is sad.
Is this Pony Sherelle? Love is Funny?
Love is mad.
It is Love is Funny, but it is not Pony. It is Aki Aleong.
Oh God! Again, not the Aki Aleong song that I would have picked.
Well, obviously it's like a new favorite of ours, a recent discovery. But I picked it because I really wanted to talk about the impact that he had and his tie-in to Technicolor Paradise and the Exotica compilation.
So Aki was a legit movie star, maybe like a C-lister or something like that. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. Like, he was in a lot of movies. He's just probably not somebody that a lot of people know, but he was in a lot of stuff. He also had a number of record labels. He was a producer at World Pacific Records. He was the first Asian American record executive, as far as he tells me, and I haven't been able to prove otherwise. And he had a really cool label called Pan World in the 60s that put out great artists like Hannibal and a lot of his own recordings, Sam and the Soul Walkers, Bob Relf, Just really incredible soul music coming at a, probably the peak period for making great R&B and soul records. And he had his fingers in just a lot of different pies. When I found him, I was interested in this cool Exotica adjacent song that he did called Voodoo Drums. We were working on this comp called Technicolor Paradise, and I was digging through all this stuff. And I think, again, like on Rob's suggestion, like somebody needs to go through all this stuff and like figure out what's good or what can be licensed. And I just took it upon myself one day to go through and scrape the entire site and make a bunch of piles. And, the funny and cool thing about Exotica, and I think, maybe in general about how we think about Numero, is it's like it was a genre that not a lot of people were really looking into when we got into it in like 2015. And it's sort of been now like a mantra, is like, go where the market isn't. If the market is not interested in buying 60s country records, you should probably be buying 60s country records. And so Exotica was the exact same kind of thing, where it's like the records were really affordable and also really quite good. And we made this pretty expansive triple LP of what we thought was the most interesting underground Exotica. And Aki was just one of those guys, and it happened to be that he had this much larger catalog. And our strategy began changing in 2015 and 2016, where it's like, oh, we should start getting into these labels and stop thinking about it as like, we have to make a compilation of every single song on this. And instead just starting to look at it as like, what if we started just putting this stuff up digitally and letting the market dictate the direction that we should go in terms of actually pressing something?
And Aki is really the archetype for the label owner who is, they're in entertainment. We see this with a lot of these. You mentioned Pony Sherelle. These are people who come from an entertainment background. They might dabble in acting. They might dabble in musicals. They've got a gig performing at the MGM Grand or something. They're putting out teeners and small combo jazz, and they're trying to quote unquote pop or lounge music, or they've got to try everything because that is how finding a hit works. You trace that next trend. And so Aki, I think, is the archetype for a lot of label owners that we dealt with around Exotica, around Girl Group, some of the surf comps we got coming out. You're not from around here. They're connected to a lot of different worlds.
Darla Hood is really another one. It's like, we sort of found out that she'd made some cool Exotica adjacent records. And then when we started digging into it, we recognized that Darla's husband, this guy, Jose Granson, had in a way been kind of doing what Numero was doing, but he'd been doing it in the 50s. He'd been going up and buying publishing catalogs in the 1940s. And so now Numero controls things like Key Largo, which is probably not a song that a lot of people think about, but was one of the biggest songs of the 1940s.
Is there any genre that you think we will never touch that, though?
I don't think so.
Everything is on the table.
I would say probably like pre-Renaissance.
Rob, that means someone's going to come to you with an idea for that right off the back of this podcast.
I would love
Someone
that.
who thinks they can change your mind. Anyone out there who's got some fantastic pre-Renaissance catalog, feel free to tap Rob and Ken up.
a self-releasing viola da gamba player. I'm game.
You need to start thinking about the titles for that compilation now. But here we are at the last track. Let's hear it.
My life's okay, I've seen the highs of freedom, highs of loving, highs of living. My life is fine. Through my pain and tears, I am not fighting time. Live to laugh, live to cry, wonder why.
Shyra Small.
My Life's All Right, Shyra Small.
No, I thought this was a good track to sort of end on because this is a upcoming release for us. She's a very cool story of how you guys discovered this record that really never saw the light of day to a normal consumer.
I think we heard that on Soulstrut through Anthony Pearson made a mix, Rob, if I'm correct.
It was on an Anthony Pearson mix. That is correct. I think we had gotten connected to Lars Clutterham, who was her teacher, if I recall.
We weren't connected to him. He was able to be found.
That's what I
the
mean. Yeah.
And so we did a accurate search, I think, or were we even using accurate at this point, or we were doing reverse yellow pages? I can't remember what service we were using, but we would use this some kind of janky.
It was actually called Intellius.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, so what we would do, I think it cost $8 for the day. So I would basically gather stuff for a few weeks and then spend $8 and try and get as much done in that day. And I would be like white knuckling it for the, just
24 hours, literally
pounding out searches. I would actually time it so I could do a little the next morning, because then I would get up and I'd be like, oh yeah, I forgot this. And then I would have a little extra time in the morning. But yeah, we would try and pack as much in for that $8. I do remember tracking down Lars Clutterham.
He was the music teacher at this Quaker school in Pennsylvania. Shyra is not that much younger than him, like maybe only like 5 years or something like that. So he was really young when they were making this music, and he wanted to help these students do these projects every year. And the project that Shyra really wanted to do is she wanted to record an album. And she came from Harlem and was sent away to boarding school in high school, and ended up completely reinventing her life in this boarding school, and having some really deep thoughts about math and life, and writing some pretty insightful lyrics. I think she was like 17 when she made this record, maybe 16. And they went into a studio in Philly and they cut it in one day with some random session musicians, and it came out and was only available to people who attended this school. So maybe 100, maybe 300 copies. I don't think we've ever gotten to the bottom of that mystery, but it's very rare. I didn't even have a copy until Lars sent me a copy of the record. I think it's probably one of the rarest Numero titles at this point. The song that we used was this song called Eternal Life. You picked My Life's All Right, but at the time we were really enamored with Eternal Life, and we used it on this compilation called Ladies from the Canyon, which was all this sort of like Joni Mitchell adjacent private press folk music that Rob and I were both really into around, I don't know, when we started the label. It's a real outlier on the record. It kind of is maybe more in like the kind of jazzier vein of the Joni catalog.
If we were making that compilation today, we would not have included it.
Yeah. There's a couple of songs we probably wouldn't have included. But, at the time we didn't have that many options. It's just like, we want to make a record. You got to get 15 songs together. What's the quickest path to getting 15 songs together? And so we put that song on there, and again, it's another one of those things where like nobody cared for the longest time. I always loved Eternal Life. I thought that was such a beautiful song and such a beautiful moment on that record, and couldn't get anybody to care. And then in like 17 or 18, Andres, who performs under the name Art Wilson sometimes, or ART Wilson, he did a sample of Eternal Life, and he did an interview with Shyra, and he was the first person who was like, man, that record is really cool. I think it's an unheralded gem, and you guys should reissue it. And I was like, you are crazy. Like, I just didn't rate it as a complete album. But then I started to sit down and listen to it, and I was like, okay, well, let's put it up digitally. And so we put it up digitally. We did a full album deal with Shyra on the thing, and we were like, let's try it. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of took on a life of its own. And funny enough, it's not Eternal Life that people have gravitated to. It's My Life's All Right, which is a much more positive song. There's a melancholy to it still that I think like really hits people pretty hard. Now we're pressing an LP because we have this sort of program that I think it's public, but it's pretty internal, which is like, get something to 1 million streams and we'll press it. This is another one of those cases where it's been listened to 1 million times. Let's get it into the market.
And Shira is still around, and what is her take on all of this? Did she go on to make more music after this album? Or is she like, I can't believe people want to put this out in 2023?
She didn't make any more music after, and she didn't have a career in music at all. She became a nurse and spent her life saving people. But she retired a couple of years ago, and she actually has recorded a couple of new songs with Lars Clutterham that she sent to us, and we'll see if those make the light of day. As far as, is she blown away that people want to listen to her music? Yeah, as I think most people who are in the Numero universe are. It's just like, I can't believe that this thing that I did when I was so young has now become so important to a completely new generation of people.
Okay, that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ken and Rob. We really appreciate you coming and sharing all these stories. And we're looking forward to chatting with you in the next episode as well. about maybe what we'd call the other side of Numero Group.
Live below, above, beside, smile a while. Going slow, well let it ride, just my style. But through the haze I'll live my love, live below, live above. Yeah, my life's alright.
You've been listening to Secretly Frequencies. I'm Tom Davies, and my co-host is Jen Newcomer. Our guest label this time is Numero Group. You can hear all the songs from today's episode on our playlists via the link in the show notes. And do check back in the Secretly Frequencies archives for shows with Dead Oceans, Jag Jaguar, Secretly Canadian, and more.
Thanks for having me. The Secretly Society podcast is an original production of the Secretly Group. This episode was produced and edited by Sarah Miles and executive produced by House of Hutch. The project manager for the Secretly Society podcast is Mimi Gontar. Robbie Morris is the creative director. Look out for more from the Secretly Society, wherever you get your podcasts.